This is your host, Swapnil Bharti, and welcome to another episode of TFR Let's Talk. And today, our guest is Mark Nunnikhoven, Distinguished Cloud Strategist at Lacework. Mark, it's great to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me here, Swapnil. I'm excited.
You recently joined the company. I want to know because you have a very impressive, very exciting background. So I want to know a bit about you. Tell us about yourself.
Sure, yeah, and that's right. I just joined Lacework a little under a month ago already, even though it feels like a long time because I've been learning tons. But I've been in the security and the cloud security field for a really long time now. My background is in forensic investigations. That's where I did my graduate work. I worked for the Canadian federal government for a decade, doing all sorts of different security positions, policy, investigations, network engineering, all different types of things. And then I spent the last decade as a head of research at another vendor in the cloud security space, helping build up their practice, and been working very closely with AWS, with Azure, with GCP, and with organizations around the world, really trying to understand how security changes when you go to the cloud and how it can actually help propel organizations forward. So I like to get my hands in a lot of different areas and work on a lot of different things because I think it's really exciting stuff.
And security has kind of become, I think, mainstream talk these days, especially in the cloud space. In traditional IT, in most of the cases, security is an afterthought. It's someone else's problem. It's not developer's problem. In a cloud native world, that's where things start. Also, once you have millions or thousands of deployment, it's very hard to secure those systems. So it should be in the developer's pipeline itself. Looking at your career, how do you see the way security is being embraced by the cloud native community versus traditional IT?
Yeah, and that's a really interesting way to frame it. And I think that, having been in this game for decades, which is an odd thing to say, I've seen it change. And I think really, what you said is spot on, is that traditionally security was always this thing done by that other team, by the security team that you talked to sort of when you kicked off a project and when you were about to go live, and you never really communicated in between unless it was something really negative, like they heard about something you were trying to do that they'd never seen before, so they were telling you to stop. And as we've seen cloud be adopted, we're 15 years into the cloud at this point. Businesses really start to get it, and they understand that it's a set of tools that can help them innovate faster. They can start to realize that IT isn't just a drag on the business, that it can help push it forward. And of course, security has had to change the way that it operates, and that's both from a technology side of things as well as the people side. And I've seen that at different paces. And I think what keeps me going is seeing those organizations, seeing those security teams that really get it and understand, hey, we can get the teams that are building stuff in the cloud to do a lot of the cybersecurity work. So tweaking the security controls close to the systems. And we as a security team can step back and look at the big picture. That excites me, and helping get more teams to that point is really what keeps me going.
I would like to talk about the cultural and social aspect or people aspect of it as well. But I also, since we're talking about cloud, I also want to talk a bit about, when we do talk about cloud and we actually talk about multi-cloud, hybrid cloud, where we do have on-prem, you do have, and then we're also talking about edge these days, where the devices are remotely, and we're talking about edge data centers, where you have a lot of limitations. So can you also talk about the challenge? Cloud native is already complicated, but the new challenge that emerged because now you are dealing with the hybrid cloud, multi-cloud story. So talk about security challenges from that perspective.
Yeah, and it's a very, very good point, Swapnil, is that basically your IT infrastructure is everywhere. And in fact, as the years go by, we're just expanding to more places. We're not actually consolidating, which is good. That totally makes sense to put processing and data close to where it needs to be used, and then take advantage of centralization when you can get sort of economies of scale. The challenge is that traditional security really hasn't kept up, and a lot of security teams fall into this trap of deploying out a lot of point products because they say, well, we have a problem with the edge, so we're going to try to solve the edge in isolation, or we have a problem on-prem, so we're going to solve just that. But that's not how our businesses run. Our businesses look at it holistically, and they look at sort of the business workflow. And where we're seeing real advancement is when you look at security as that type of a data problem and saying, okay, I can take all of this security data from all these different points to get a better picture, to get better context as to what's going on in my business. And then once you have that context, you can start to make intelligent decisions. So you're no longer kind of peering through that little keyhole and trying to say, like, what's going on in the next room. You're taking that step back and getting that overview and really seeing what's going on so that you can realize that maybe that thing you thought was super important actually isn't in context. And that thing you were ignoring is critical to your business and you need to pay more attention to.
Right. One more thing here is that when you do mention traditional or legacy security vendors, the way they approach, they bring the same principles, same practices, but cloud native is a more here you're dealing with thousands of machines, not that. So can you also talk about that? How different is security? The way legacy traditional vendors handle it, and the way you would want it to be approached.
Yeah, and that's a very good point is that, when you're looking at traditional legacy vendors and even that traditional mindset, not just the technology, but the traditional mindset that people have, is it's very much hammer nail, right? I have a server, I need to lock that server down. What does that server do? I don't care. I just need to lock it down. And that is not, it's gotten by for a really long time, but that really hasn't pushed things forward in the security world. And I think, to be honest, as a security professional, as a cloud professional, I get frustrated when I see that because I look at other areas of the business and see how they're taking advantage of cloud. So a great example is all these companies who are pushing into data lakes and saying, if we put all our data into one place and organized it, we can start to pull out new insights about what's going on in our business to open new markets or to take advantage of new areas to really achieve our goals. And if sitting back and watching security teams go, that's not for us, we're okay with this sort of hammer and nail approach, that's challenging, that's frustrating. Because if you do look at it as a data problem, if you do look at it and say, how can we take a modern approach to it, we can actually make our jobs easier. I spent more than enough time in a SOC looking at log lines go by, wasting these hours going, is this important? Is this important? I don't know. I need more context. To build out tooling, which is what we're doing at Lacework, what other cutting edge cloud security companies and CSPs are doing, to build out that cutting edge tooling to say, hey, we can do better and we can focus on things that really matter. I think that's extremely exciting.
And since you did mention data and data lakes, even in that case, enterprise customers, they do have to deal with data warehouses, data lakes, plus both have their own limitations. And as you rightly mentioned, you have to extract that analysis, that value out of the data. So they have to move data back and forth. What happened to security when they are moving their data? And sometimes the data is in petabytes, they cannot even move it.
Yeah, and that's a challenge. So we've seen data warehouse was a big thing, now into data lake. Reality is a lot of the time, if you don't prepare for it, it ends up kind of being a data pit. You just shove everything in and hope something comes out better. And that's very analogous to the security approach, right? Is that we're going to try to secure these different areas and we hope we get a better overall security posture. So for me, it's really, it's a combo of the tooling, but also what you do with the tooling. And because as much as I can tell you, like, in an ideal world, you're using cloud native security tooling, cloud native, products to move your business forward on the building side. The reality is, unless you started business today, you've got a mix of different things. You've got on-prem, you've got a data warehouse that you're trying to migrate to a data lake. You've got point products in the security world. It's messy. And really, for me, that's where it comes back to context. Can you give the information to your teams so that they can make better decisions, whether that's business decisions or security decisions?
Once again, I'll go back to your career, looking at it and looking at the evolution, innovation that is happening in cloud. When we reflect on this discussion, do you think things are getting better? We do know that companies are very well aware of security. Security is no longer an afterthought for when DevSecOps is becoming more and more real with SRE. There are so many cultural transitions that are going on there, and that will also bring me to the point that I wanted to discuss earlier was the cultural shift, the social change. So do you think that, of course, technologies are there, but do you think that things are getting better? Is cloud making security better for users?
I think it is. I think when a team and an organization really understands the possibility of cloud, you can achieve a better security posture in the cloud with less resources. And if you're applying the same amount of resources, you can get a much better security posture. And the reality is that comes down to your partnership with your cloud service provider. And we talk time and time again about the shared responsibility model, and that's explaining, what your CSP, what your service provider is responsible for, and what you are responsible for. And at a minimum, you're delegating half of your responsibilities to your service provider, and they're going to do that at a world-class level, assuming you've made a good choice in provider. That lets you, with your limited resources in people and in budget, focus on what really matters. And I've yet to meet a CISO or a security team around the world who's like, no, I got enough people, I got enough money, I'm good. We're all strapped for time, we're all strapped for resources. So if we can focus on what actually matters instead of this grunt work that we have been for years, we can do much better in the cloud.
Yeah, and since you mentioned, just focus on what really matters. If you look at some the line between whether you call it bare metal or traditional data centers or cloud is blurring. It really doesn't matter. In the end, what matters is how your customer is being served. All the way to solar winds to the ransomware that happened, recently, where we are on the East Coast, so we struggled with the supply of gas. And then once again, some police departments were also compromised with the ransomware. So if we just look at your discussion today, a lot of work is happening from technological point of view. A lot of shift movement is happening from cultural point of view. Why are we not reaching that security nirvana that, hey, everything should be secure, we should not even have to worry about it? Just the way we have airbags in our car, we don't even think about it anymore. What is stopping companies from achieving that?
Yeah, and that's a really good point, and it's obviously very, very complicated. But I think for me, if we had to boil it down to one thing, I think what it really comes down to is security isn't, as a team, isn't as involved with the rest of the business as they should be. Security as a concept isn't integrated into the rest of the business as it should be. So if we look to the big three cloud service providers, to Google, to AWS, to Azure, they all advocate some flavor of the same thing in how to build well, how to build properly in the cloud. And one of those things is that security is one of the pillars among many, among performance, among operational efficiency, that kind of thing. And that is really key. We can't keep thinking of security as an afterthought. We need to think about it as an integral part of what we do. For me, it really boils down to a simple definition. If you're looking at cybersecurity, it's really making sure that whatever you build works as you intend and only as you intend. And for years, we've forgotten the second half of that statement. We just say, oh, this app generates my report, or it spit out that image, or it did whatever it was supposed to do. We don't look at that other part of, is that all it can do? And I think until we change that thinking, we're still going to struggle with these issues like you were citing in the question.
Right. If I put you in a spot and ask you, hey, do you have any playbook or kind of set of recommendation for businesses so that they start bringing security in their processes, into their developers' pipeline, into their own culture? How should they approach it?
Yeah. Can I fake technical issues if you're going to put me on the spot and be like, oh, I'm cutting out? No, but I mean, all jokes aside, that's a great thing, is that if you look at, okay, what's one thing you can do? Because we can paint a big picture, and that's a mountain of work, and, nobody wants to start there. But I think where you need to start, pushing it all aside, is you need to start with communication. You need to have your security team realizing that they can't do all the work. They need to talk to the other teams to get them to build in a secure manner. And part of that conversation is making sure that you've got the data and the context to understand what's going on. And I think that's where, if we go back to the tooling side, a lot of the tooling has failed in the past, is that it's working to prevent something without telling people why that was a problem in the first place. So if you can give your teams that are building, your security teams, all of the business teams, that context of saying, hey, this is an issue, here's why it's an issue, and here's why it matters to your business, that is absolutely critical. That's a great first step, because it enables that conversation so that you can actually build better systems, which are by default more secure systems.
The Biden administration recently, they're working on an executive order. It's in early phases, so the language is still debatable, but the intentions are really, really good, which is to actually know what is in the device, or what kind of especially when you look at open source, the supply chain bill of material becomes really important. You do not even know where the all that code that you're using is coming from. So I would like to know from you, what are your thoughts on this approach? Should more governments do have a policy like that? So no matter what, whether you're talking about hardware or software, you should know what's in there.
Yeah, and that's a very good point. And I applaud the efforts by the administration. Yes, the language needs to be massaged and still needs to be worked on. But anytime cybersecurity is brought up at a high level, it's going to drive attention and it's going to drive change. And I think that's absolutely critical because fundamentally, when you're looking at a number of business decisions, security is just one of many. Unless there's a mandate that is a requirement that you absolutely have to do it, you're not going to have the proper weighting on it because you'll look at, well, we could expand and grow fourth quarter profits, or we could sink money into retrofitting all of our systems from 10 years ago. You need that mandate because that supply chain of software and of hardware is really, really complicated. Developers more and more are building on the shoulders of other people's work, which is a great thing, but you can't assume that that work was done with security in mind or your particular threat model in mind. So you need to go back and validate it. You need to make sure that everything is built to the standards of your particular risk model. And again, that ties back into the question of context and behaviors and data. If you're not monitoring your systems properly, if you're not seeing the context of how things are behaving, then it's a problem. And that's where we see OT getting into problems time and time again with operational technology. For years, it was treated like a thing, not a computer. And that's coming back to bite a lot of organizations. So I applaud the efforts of the current administration, and in fact, of any government, to try to set that bar of saying, hey, we need to do better, start focusing on these things. It's important not just for you, but for our community and our country as a whole.
Excellent. Mark, thank you so much for sitting down with me and talk about the new phase in your career, in your journey with Lacework. And also we got deeper into the cloud native security. And I love to have you again on the show. But thank you for today.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And I'm happy to come back anytime.